is another wonderful rollicking edition. Are you prepared to rollick, Adam?
I am ready to rollick and roll.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a wonderful edition of the Comic Obsessive here. This is episode 36 or 36.5, depending on if you count our Heroes Con 2025 crossover edition as an episode, which I think even though it was only 12 minutes, I think it's really an episode.
Yeah, I mean, Heroes Con is such a big deal. We had to devote some time to it.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have a good time at the show this year?
Man, it was a blast. It's always a blast, and
Yeah.
it's so fun to hear the creators talk about it too, because they always say the same thing. This is the best show. Baltimore's
Hmm.
pretty good, but this is the best show.
Yeah.
Um, I think just for kind of the purity of the comic experience, I think
Yeah.
Heroes Con can't be beat.
Yeah, it's cool to walk around, to get to talk with people. And I don't know about you, but I'm at the age where I'm starting to think I might just take a Barca Lounger and just sort of roll around in it. I came home and have been standing in lines and walking around so much. I admit, as a manly man, I took a long hot bath, and my legs were grateful. So there's definitely that side of it too.
Yeah, I had on a new pair of shoes, but they didn't need, breaking in or anything, but they still couldn't hold up to all the steps. I think like on the first day, uh, yeah, Friday, I think I got about 15,000 steps
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we are gathered here, assembled, if you will, to talk about the Avengers. And I should have done a roll call. As always, I'm Jason Dehart, and joining me is
I'm Adam Piles.
that's right, that's right, you are. Uh, now, I am not a Marvel expert when it comes to like 90s comics. I did read some Marvel, but the 90s, correct me if I'm wrong, they weren't the easiest time to be working at Marvel Comics. Is this right?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of change happening in the 90s. I think the comic industry, by its nature, is always kind of chaotic with the creative forces and the editorial forces behind the scenes. But I think the 90s was pretty intense. I mean, Marvel went bankrupt, and
Hmm.
it was just a crazy time in the history of comics publishing.
As a reader, I didn't really know anything about all that. I knew that I liked DC. I knew that I was becoming kind of like a young adult teenager. So for me, the big debate was, do I keep reading these? And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I kept reading. But I remember like the Silver Sable foil covers and the Ghost Rider glow in the dark covers and the Topps cards and all of those things. But behind the scenes, it was a little messier.
Yeah, and the 90s get such a bad rap for bad art and bad storytelling and gimmick covers and all the things like that. And I get it on one level, but on another level, I mean, the 90s gave us, Marvels, the series,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Kingdom Come and Mark Waid's Flash. And this title right here, Kurt Busiek and George Perez, Avengers. And,
Yeah.
there was definitely some good stuff, both indie, out of the mainstream. You had like Madman, coming out in the 90s, I think it was. Um,
Hmm.
Hellboy. Um, but then you had some good mainstream stuff too, like I just mentioned. So the 90s get a bad rap. There was a lot of good stuff in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, speaking of Madman, not to take us down a side road here, did you wind up catching up with Allred at the show?
I did. Uh,
Yeah.
so he was supposed to be there all 3 days. He got there late on the first day because of a plane situation, just, a
Mhm.
late plane, a delayed flight. And to his credit, he came in and just started signing and
Yeah.
just started talking to fans. It was in such a, good mood. And then the crazy thing is he went to a panel, came back, started signing again. And they did cap the line that night,
Hmm.
because they came over the intercom and said at 7:30 you need to be done. You need to be out. Not like
Yeah.
wrapping up, but you need to be done. And he stayed until I think I overheard the next day, 7:27, somebody got their signature from him.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and I got him at 7:15, and he was as nice as he could be. He was there the next day. The guy that worked with him was nice. Mike Allred and Laura Allred, his wife,
Hmm.
uh, his colorist, just genuinely nice people. I said something like, I really appreciate your work. And he stopped and he looked up and he's like, I really appreciate that. And just, it was a good experience.
Yeah, yeah. I got him just as he was off of the plane, and they were speeding up the line. They were kind of trying to get signatures in before his panel, but wonderful, just brief interaction with them. And yeah, very cool. That's such a cool time in comics, and Heroes Con is always great for reconnecting with that. And I wish that it would have been really amazing to get to meet George Perez in his life at some point. That would have been kind of interesting. I don't know what he was like as a person interacting at cons, but I'd imagine that would be an interesting interaction.
He was great. I did not meet him. I was an idiot, but he was in one of my first Hero Cons. He was
Yeah.
there. He was signing. He had a huge line, but every time I looked over there, he was like jumping up and going around the table and getting a picture with somebody, and then like running back and doing more sign. Like he seemed to really enjoy what he was doing and being a part of the, you know, convention. Man, really kicked myself for not standing in line for him. But it is what it is, and it's sad to say that he passed on. What, a couple years ago now? Is it three,
Hmm.
two,
Hmm.
2 or 3?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I will say he's renowned for his attention to detail and just crazy amount of art, which we'll get into as we dig into this book, but we'll kind of dig into some of your knowledge of it and the background of the book. But dropping in on these first few pages, it's almost as though if you were to have never seen a Marvel movie and then you drop in on like the last half hour of Endgame, there's like all of this stuff happening. There are all of
yeah.
these characters, which is, I think, kind of what I guess they were going after with the book. And of course, Perez, I mean, he kills it, of course. Uh, so this is a number one, but the
It
year is
is.
1998.
It is.
What
It is.
what magic, what sorcery is this? What by the hooves of Puck, what is this? I think is what they
So
say at one point.
yeah. So I didn't do any research for this because I lived it. Like I was there for every bit of this. And
Mhm.
so what happened was in the 90s, what became, the Image crew, they left Marvel and they went and they formed
Mhm.
Image. And then it kind of really threw a wrench in Marvel to have all those super hot artists leave. And so I think X-Men did pretty well with Andy Kubert, Adam Kubert doing Wolverine. I think they
Mhm.
stayed afloat. I think X-Men was still, a very strong selling title, but everything else, Spider-Man had the Clone Saga going on, and that's just a whole different ball of wax. But
Yeah, yeah.
the other traditional titles like the Fantastic Four and Avengers and Iron Man and Thor, they were suffering. I remember reading them and just not really being very invested in them. They felt dark. Thor felt very dark and gloomy and like this is
Hmm.
the end times and just kind of depressing.
Yeah.
Avengers had something with like a teen Tony Stark that came back and betrayed the Avengers. It was a weird thing. And so Marvel decided to uh, give their 4 titles to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld because a number of years had passed. About 4 years had passed, I guess, at this point, uh, since they had gone off to do Image. And so,
Mhm.
probably some hurt feelings and egos had kind of subsided. So they gave Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee the Avengers, Iron Man, and America, the Captain
Mhm.
America
Mhm.
title. Um, and so they gave them those titles and they actually tied it into a story where like all the Avengers and a lot of the heroes kind of sacrifice themselves to beat Onslaught. And so that was their way of rebooting those four titles. And so what
Hmm.
was supposed to have happened was Franklin Richards took all those heroes when they sacrificed themselves and put them in a pocket universe. And so they went and they did, like Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld were in charge of the books. Uh, I think Jim Lee stayed through the entire run of like Fantastic Four, but Rob Liefeld kind of he he abandoned ship about halfway through, I think. But after about a year, they decided, yeah, it's not working. Let's bring it all back. And so they did. And it was a really true return to form. Thor was awesome. It had, let's see, John Romita Jr. on that, but Thor was great. Iron Man was great. Cap came back and was great. Cap was the only one that was great before because Mark Waid and Ron Garney had
Oh
gotten a
yeah.
hold of it. They were doing fantastic stuff and it got interrupted. But when they brought it back, I believe they hopped on the book again and they brought back Avengers. And it was like I say, a return to form because it's classic storytelling with these
Hmm.
characters and their classic uh, costumes. Iron Man had a updated costume, but everybody it felt very traditional, but not in a bad way, just more like
Yeah.
classic. But with Kurt Busiek writing it, it was just very good writing and story, interesting character development, interesting plot points. And with Perez killing it on pencils, the Avengers was one of the best titles to come back, and they were all good.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and Busiek, or I keep saying the wrong name, Perez said apparently he'd kind of been out of the industry for a little while, not really being a voice or a talent in the industry for a while. And so he took this as a challenge. He wanted to prove to himself and I think to fans that he could do a monthly book again. And like to say he killed it is not even close. It's just a
Incredibly organized to me. Do you think there's going to be, as we record this, we are in anticipation of the Fantastic Four movie, the first air quotes true Marvel Fantastic Four. Do you think we're going to have pocket universes happening there?
I would imagine so. I would imagine that's why there is a Shalabal Silver Surfer and not a Norrin
Mhm.
Rad Silver Surfer. But um, and it would have to be that, wouldn't it? Because like no mention of the Fantastic Four and the
Mhm.
Avengers movies or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
because it's obviously set like in the 60s. So
Mhm.
um yeah, there has to be something going on there with a different universe or dimension or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that and taking it back to Kurt Busiek for a minute. I knew him from, Astro City.
Yeah.
So there's another connection to the Alex Ross pieces that you were referencing a little while ago. Alex Ross being so amazing. I think he had like a gallery of his work premiere this sometime this month or sometime recently. He's just that kind of artist. And I remember those books very strongly. I don't remember his work in the Marvel universe, Kurt Busiek's, that is, but really cool to see him balance so many characters. I started reading the first issue of this and got like 5 or 6 issues in like one sitting because it just kind of bounces. The storytelling really goes from these.
Yeah. And you mentioned that Busiek and Alex Ross pairing that again is like 90s stuff and
Hmm.
Astro City, that's 90s stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of my little not causes, that's not the right way to say it, but I certainly it kind of annoys me when people say the 90s was all, junk and gimmick covers because it just wasn't. It had some great stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it was. There was so much going on that, if you only see one or two pieces and kind of base your opinion on those, then you're not getting the full ride because you have Image, you have what was happening at Marvel, what was happening at DC. You were talking about like the dark storytelling, which comes straight out of the late '80s with the British invasion. I mean, there's a lot going on there, and probably a brave move of Busiek and Perez to kind of take it back old school as they were closing out the '90s with this when there had been so much up in the air and so many storytelling tricks turning through the '90s.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that way. But, he was there in the late 70s and early 80s. Apparently, he and John Byrne were kind of I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast. They were the two talents kind of fighting for number one. And then
Mhm.
Perez went to DC and did Teen Titans with Wolfman and became,
Yeah,
a mega star there.
yeah, yeah. Uh, the second issue of this, we've not summed up much of the story just yet, but I will say the second issue surprised me from the direction that it went in, and some really nice airtime for Thor there, I thought.
Yeah. 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 They all get their moments and it's just, it's funny, but not like, laugh out loud. But there's one particular moment, I think it's in the first one, in the first issue, because I read ahead too, where what's his name? Justice. Oh yeah, Justice. They're kind of laying it on the line, what the situation is and how they're all going to have to split up. And Justice says, "Excuse me, I'm Justice of the New Warriors. I know I shouldn't even be here, but with all these attacks on the Avengers and now splitting the team up, well, it could be a trap." And then there's like a beat. There's that panel where Hawkeye, Witch, Scarlet Witch, Janet, Thor, Iron Man, and Cap are all just giving him a like dead-eyed look, and he's like, "Oh, right. Of course it's a trap. You already know that. Sorry. Can I just not?" Like that's just such, you know, those little we talk about it a lot on here, those little human moments, could you imagine that?
Mhm.
Saying something
Mhm.
like that and like the mega stars of Marvel turn and look at you like, yeah, it's just
Next,
yeah,
next.
no, yeah, yeah.
I
It's
would
funny.
totally be that guy too. I'd be like, you know what? It seems like Doctor Doom might be behind this. Like, yeah, obviously, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
There's
Yeah.
one page in this thing that I think it was like 14 or 15 panels
Oh,
that were on this one page,
are
and
you
I
talking?
in issue one.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, And I was kind of really taken in by some of the breakdowns in this too, which apparently is, one of the harder things to do as a comics creator. The breakdowns I've heard are kind of a pain, but I mean that sort of like shattered glass panel at the bottom of the first page, and then leading through. Yeah, I think it's in my edition, it's like page 13 or so where we have like I think 15 or 16 panels working there. Uh, just kind of broken up and we're getting all of these reaction shots of different characters and something is definitely happening and going on. Great classic look at Black Panther too. I love that classic Black Panther with sort of the textured gloves on his arms.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, we didn't talk about like the credits for this, but this Tom Smith who did the colors,
Hmm.
they were tremendous colors, especially for this time period. For 1998 to have colors that look like this
Yeah.
and to even get like, a glow effect from aspects of Iron Man's armor, but to have that come through, it's pretty amazing stuff for 1998.
Yeah, yeah. And one of my favorite letterers or lettering teams there, Richard Starkings in Comic Craft,
Yep.
like just killing it. He did a lot on, my love of Batman the Animated Series and the Batman Adventures, but then he was also the guy on Gen X and designed a lot of logos. So I always love seeing his name on a book as well.
So we've talked about Kurt Busiek and George Perez and Richard Starkings. I mentioned
Hmm.
Tom Smith as how do you say that? Revort? Report,
hmm hmm
is editor, and he's kind of like a guru of Marvel history
hmm
and everything. But Alvey, that did inking. But can you imagine being George Perez inker? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, that would be quite the challenge, wouldn't it?
it
And
was like,
intimidating.
yeah, especially the first issue, which is, oversized, whatever it is, probably 48 pages. I'm not sure.
hmm
But good gosh, imagine getting that job being like, I'm a Marvel inker. Who am I inking? You're inking George Perez on the Avengers. Oh gosh. Like good gosh. But yeah, the art is just tremendous. And this like Thor's dramatic entrance in the window. I think that's just like breathtaking. The Avengers,
Totally.
gate, um, where it says chapter
hmm
one, and there came a day, which of course is wonderful and awesome that it's called and there came a day. And then like all the Avengers hanging out in the study. But then when Thor he doesn't walk in, he enters dramatically. It's just amazing stuff right there.
Yeah, yeah. That shot of Thor also stood out to me. And as I was saying earlier, I feel like Thor gets, among these characters, he gets some really nice airtime, as does the Scarlet Witch. The Scarlet Witch has some nice forefront action happening in this as well.
Yeah, especially in the like whole arc of the story. I mean, it really becomes a kind of a Scarlet Witch story. Uh,
hmm
there as it kind of uh goes on. And there's one page that I remember reading in 1998 when it came out. Um, and I flipped the page and there's Hawkeye. And Hawkeye is like sliding on that wire with his
It's a great
bow.
shot. Yeah.
It's a great shot, but it was also almost like an apology for all the dark and gloomy
Yeah.
storytelling that had come before. It's like, hey, we're back. We want to have some fun with this. We got good stuff. We got good toys. We're gonna play with them. Let's enjoy it. And I remember turning the page and seeing that Hawkeye, and just it's almost like a sigh of relief when I saw it.
hmm
Like, all right, this is gonna be fun. It's gonna be
Yeah.
great. But I guess we should probably at some point summarize the story.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It is cataclysmic stuff, right? And we have
It is.
a mythic sword of MacGuffin that is
Yeah.
part of the deal. Mystic sword does lead into the shenanigans and some of the things that happen in the second issue, which was surprising to me, getting to see these characters sort of spread across time. But essentially, we have a range of sort of your variety characters, maybe your tier two, tier three characters that are all engaged in these epic battles at the beginning, and the first couple of pages feel like that. It feels like almost the cinema setup of one scene and then another scene, and then magically, quite literally, their enemies disappear.
Yeah.
And so this causes all of the Avengers to then, shall I say it, assemble,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they convene to kind of try to discover what's happening and what has just been going on. Sort of like they're trying to put all of the fires out at once, which I imagine working in comics in the 90s might have felt like at a time
Yeah.
or two.
Yeah. Maybe it was symbolic of that, right?
Yeah, yeah, could have been, could have been. So they assemble and they realize that there is this magical piece that is part of the story, and Mordred appears to them. And so we have some Arthurian elements of the story that are thrown in as well.
Absolutely. Mordred and Morgan Le Fay, they were old villains from the 80s, I believe.
hmm hmm
And so it was nice to see them come back in such a serious way.
Yeah.
Yep. So I guess they just put the pieces together, figure out, with Thor's input, how he kind of materialized in Asgard. I guess that was them coming back from the pocket universe and
hmm
then seeing the destruction and telling everybody what he saw. It's then basically a charge into action to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. And as I mentioned, that then takes them back into kind of the dimension of history, right? And the character that's able to really negotiate and handle this mythic sword is none other than Wanda. And it was really nice to see Wanda and Quicksilver get kind of a showcase at the beginning. And then for people that enjoy kind of the Marvel universe all together. I mean, that's kind of the cool aspect of what this book did for me too. Like you jump in and you've got Wanda, you've got Quicksilver, you turn the page and there's Beast leaping in, and then not too far from that you have kind of your OG, Captain America, Thor, Iron Man joining the fray, and then we have the Fantastic Four that make an appearance before the end of the first five issues as well. So they all put their heads together around this problem of what is going on.
Yep. It could be a trap.
It might be. It might be. Could have been.
And they solved the crisis. There's some cool little moments where in like the second issue, they're in this different universe or different dimension, or they're being controlled, and they're all George Perez apparently really enjoyed the reimaginings of all of their costumes into this
Hmm.
middle-age themed uh, land. I really like Captain America's Yeoman
Uh-huh,
America.
uh-huh.
That was great. That was
Yeah.
great.
There's a character who gets some really nice play in this. I'm so glad you recommended this run because actually at the end of last summer, I was trying to read some of the original appearances of Simon Baker, Wonder Man, and kind of check that out a little bit. So Wonder
Oh,
Man
Williams.
appears. Yep, that was Simon Williams. Sorry, Simon Williams. Simon Baker is an actor that would do a great job as Simon Williams. Um, but yeah, he shows up, and I will say I'm not sure. Just celebrating the art again, I'm not sure what the effects were, but the way he was rendered on the page is sort of like there and not there was really cool to see, especially thinking, this was before the age of doing a whole lot of that with computers. Star Kings had started doing some lettering software kind of stuff, but I'm assuming that was Perez and his special effects on the page, or Perez.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be my guess too. Incredible, incredible looking book for the time period. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. I want to see more of like some strong Wonder Man storytelling because I feel like he's a character that I haven't spent as much time with as some of these others. I honestly think some of my introduction to some of these characters came in like their own standalone books and graphic novels more so than the team books.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. And I don't know how far you read, but they certainly do explore the Simon Williams character because there's kind of a love triangle with
Hmm.
Vision
Hmm.
and Simon Williams and Scarlet Witch, and it's great. It's great drama. It's yeah, just classic Avengers storytelling. They were not shying away from it. It wasn't, you know, people having to die every issue and things will never be the same ever again after every issue. It was just good storytelling. One thing that I want to mention is like, you know, the MCU fans and just the Marvel fans in general, we waited for a
Yeah.
decade plus, I guess, really, for Captain America to say Avengers Assemble.
Hmm.
And they even teased it in the second one, and it was big fun when it finally happened, right? I
Yeah.
don't know if it was such a big deal before this series, because did you catch that in issue 4
Yeah.
or towards the
Yeah.
end of it? Yeah. They announced the new team, and Captain America says something like, which by the way is an Avengers thing too. I don't know if any listeners out there would have any big history reading the Avengers comics, but there's great uh, Avengers issues where they're picking a team. Like I remember a run in the early 90s before it got all dark and gloomy, where it was Cap on the cover as chairman with the gavel, and they're picking a new team. They did it in the
Yes.
80s. They did it in the 70s. There's always who's going to be the next Avenger type of storyline.
Mm-hmm.
But number four, when they're doing their press conference and they're all standing there, and it's a very classic team too, which is it's kind of the Busiek team. It's the team that he did in the 70s. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of it, with some new additions. But anyway, they're all standing there and they're all whispering to each other behind Cap. Is he gonna say it? Yeah, he'll say it. He always says it. Yeah, he'll say it. I don't think he's gonna say it. He's gonna say it. Just give him a chance. And then I think Iron Man says, "Come on, man, say it." And
Yeah.
then it's the big Avengers assemble, which, like I say, I think that maybe kind of cemented it in fans' minds as such an Avengers catchphrase. Like it'd been used for years, but there's also issues where it says Avengers attack. So
I was expecting like a flame on at that moment, honestly.
yeah, yeah, that probably gave me chills back in the day. I remember that being a big deal when I turned the page and the new team is gathered there, and it's Avengers Assemble in the big words, and gotta love it.
Yeah. The cover of that issue too is so emblematic of that, and I think it literally says like, "Who will the new Avengers be?" or something like that. Um, so very very cool. Was this like? Would you say this is your flagship Avengers, or is there another run that has that place in your heart?
I would say this is tied for the first Avengers comics I ever got, because I got
Hmm.
those from my uncle Anthony. Gave me his kids, JJ and Jamie. He gave me their old Avengers comics. They were done with them, and I'd never, I was reading comics, but I didn't know anything about the Avengers. And so um, that was around. It was actually an era that a lot of people don't like. It's the kind of fall of Yellow Jacket, Hank Pym.
Hmm.
But to me, that was great because that was my intro to the characters.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah. So I'd say about 209 to 250 ish.
Hmm.
I had a bunch of those issues from my cousins, so that holds a special place in my heart. But this was kind of like uh, the perfect melding of everything. It was classic
Yeah.
storytelling, but with updated art in a way, because like Perez drew the Avengers in the 70s, but he didn't draw them like
Mm.
this. I mean, like
Yeah.
he poured his heart and soul into these pages. Like
Yeah.
just the detail. Like if you look at his Thor here and his Thor from, the 70s, it looks like a different character almost. Like just the level of detail that he got on these. Um, if you like this run, you got to read the event or the Ultron storyline.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It is fantastic, and I would say that to anybody listening to read the I guess it'd be Avengers volume. I guess it'd be three since um, the Image guys doing Avengers. I guess that'd be volume two. So I guess this would be volume three. But the Ultron storyline was great, and there's a great Thor part where they've battled their way through Ultron's minions, and they're all standing there looking just beat the heck up. And Thor
Yeah.
says, Ultron, we would have words with thee. And then of course it's a huge battle, and it's great, good stuff.
Yeah. Love that splash page as you're leading into issue four and the title of the issue, Too Many Avengers. Um, yeah, that's cool stuff, and you get to see the attention to detail that Perez had, and spending all the time on each character. And you have I mean, you've got your new Warriors represented there. You've got your classic Marvels. You've got even one of my favorite characters back there, Darkhawk, kind of flying in. So
Mhm.
lots of
Yeah.
cool assembly here that is happening.
And there's just a real sense of history with the storytelling here. Like when Spider-Man bows out in the first issue, I think it is, because
Mhm.
he's probably in the middle of the Clone Saga, or no, he's probably wrapping it up at that point. But anyway, um, one of the, let's see, who is it that insults him? But it's Sandman that comes to his defense, says something
Uh-huh.
like, "Yeah, you try to say anything about him after he leaves, and you'll get a face full of sand," or something like that. And they
Yeah.
had been enemies, but then he turned into an Avenger, and so I don't know, just a lot of history in this book.
Yeah, yeah. And then I mentioned that Shan Chen section that it leads into, like some of your really poster-worthy moments from this era too. That uh, would you say this would be kind of the bigger storyline before Marvel started dipping into things like Civil War?
Yeah, I would say so. Civil War was about '05, and this was
Hmm.
'98, which, when it was happening, that felt like '98 to '05. That felt like ancient history, but now, now it's
Yeah,
2025. Um, I would say this was kind of like the last classic Marvel when everything felt like it was part of one world, and um, it still felt like the classic Marvel
yeah,
with this Avengers run. I'd almost say the end of this run of Avengers with Avengers disassembled. I feel like that's kind of the entryway into like the modern Marvel
yeah.
in my
That was like 2004 when Busiek finished his run, I think. Is that right?
It might have been a little bit before that. Um,
Yeah.
I forget how long he stayed with it, but yeah, Avengers Disassembled was, um, I would say early 2000s, '03.
Cool. Love that. Enough said on the cover as well.
Yeah, yep, yep. Great stuff.
I'm
I
glad
don't
you
think,
recommended it. I hadn't checked out this era quite as much as I have wanted to, so great recommendation.
yeah, like I say, Sean Chen worked on the Iron Man title. He was the artist on the
Hmm.
Iron Man title. It was all very solid storytelling and great art, and just a return to fun for
Yeah,
comics. It's almost
true
like
enough.
they stopped being embarrassed of big and bright and loud characters and kind of moved away from the grim, and everybody's depressed and everybody's dying and everybody's past their prime and looking back. It was a return to just classic prime storytelling with these characters.
Yeah, I almost feel like that's another thing I was thinking the first time I was reading this. It's almost like this subtitle that, by the way, the Avengers is big.
Yeah, right.
That
I think
it feels like that.
yeah, should have said that on there. Heroes Return, the Avengers. By the way, the Avengers are big.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was my total takeaway from it.
yeah, good stuff. Do you have much experience with the Avengers as a title?
A little bit, honestly, a little bit. I've had more with like the individual characters in their series. As we've talked before, we've talked West Coast Avengers. I think that was my entry point. I can't remember the exact issue, but I know that it was somewhere in like 87 to 88. It would have been probably Englehart writing it, Milgram doing the art and those pieces, probably somewhere along those lines. And I remember just kind of thinking like, oh, you had your major characters that have been mainstays like Iron Man and Cap and things like that, but then like Tigra and Moon Knight. Like those were just part of the original kind of introduction to the team for me.
Yeah, yeah. In which I enjoyed those characters very much as a part of the team, but that classic team that lines up uh, at the end of issue 4,
Hmm.
I love that team. I love
Yeah,
that team. I do miss Hercules, but you got Thor. It'd probably be
Hmm.
overkill to have Hercules on a team with Thor, but
I
I
don't
do
know.
love a
I
good
don't know.
Hercules story.
Yeah, and he's still out there somewhere. Hercules is.
Yep, yep. I wanted to see him brought into the MCU, and I know he had like a little cameo, but I don't know if that was forgotten or what. But at the end of Thor 4, after
Yeah,
the whole Zeus, yeah. Which I thought that was a surprising guy to play him now that I know who that was.
Ted Lasso.
Lasso, yeah, Ted Lasso. I
Yeah,
blanked on that. Yeah. Well, I feel like I talked a lot because it was the Avengers and I got all geeked out for the Avengers.
I learned a lot. I learned a lot. It's kind of like history class in a way. Like I have these pieces that are kind of like connected. They're kind of like continents in my head. Because I remember, sort of my interaction with Marvel in the early 90s. And then there was a time that I wasn't reading comics as actively anymore. So it's always good to kind of go back and refresh myself on what was happening, and some of that, as we've talked, is because I couldn't always find them. They weren't always readily available. I feel like
Right.
DC Comics were more uh, readily available where I grew up.
Hmm. Interesting. Have you
Yeah.
ever noticed that in pop culture, until the MCU became such a force, it really seemed like DC was what was referenced anytime comics were referenced, like the Big Bang Theory. It,
Hmm.
they had Marvel references. I think Stan Lee was on there, but like a lot of it was DC stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I'm sure a lot of that is like Time Warner had DC, so they're pushing their characters and getting those across
that's true.
popular media too. So that's kind of the marriage of the media and how that works.
Yeah. Well, I think next we're going to be going into more of your area of expertise, the DC universe. What are
Yeah,
we going
yeah.
to cover next?
We're gonna keep pulling out the Pérez card here to look at a little bit of Teen Titans, the lovely adventures from the early '80s. Mr. Marv Wolfman's writing those, and so we're gonna venture there next and talk about how in the world a tower can stand up that's shaped like a T. I still haven't figured that out.
I'm looking forward to it. I read a little bit of Teen Titans, or the new Teen Titans.
Yes, the new Teen
But
Titans.
yeah, I think you are the DC guy here.
We try, I think we balance each other well, and looking forward to talking about those issues with you. And who knows, we might even get to talk about the classic Nightwing costume and that huge collar that was part of it and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, the Disco Nightwing.
Yes, yeah. I think
Don't they call that
Robert
like the,
Pattinson's
the
Batman was going for kind of a collar like that, but it just wasn't quite as
oh yeah.
embellished.
If you're out there and you're listening to the podcast, we would love to hear from you. We have a Gmail set up. I think it's just called the Comic Obsessive Podcast at Gmail.
Hmm.
We would
Hmm.
love to hear from you and hear about what Jason's doing right and what I'm doing wrong and what else we could cover and talk about and all the things.
All the things, all the things. Always glad to talk comics with you. And I think the last time we did one of these, we had Ed Brisson on. So at some point, we'll bring in a special guest of some kind, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to somebody, another creator. That'd be great.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as always, I hope everybody out there stays obsessive, and I hope you stay obsessive with comics because it's a nice thing. It's a really nice thing. The fine folks at Heroes Con do a wonderful job every year of reminding me of why I'm obsessed with it. And this is not sponsored by them or anything. I just like to give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I guess this is us signing off. Stay obsessive.